In an age of information immediacy and an ever changing landscape of discovery, it can be quite overwhelming to try to make sense of the world or the knowledge that we are given. When we are not well informed of scientific practice, where can we begin? In particular, how do we make sense of scientific information? We sat down with Dr. P.K. Rangachari to try to understand more about the nature of science, scientific mistrust, and how to navigate scientific inquiry as a layman. In his long-spanning experience applying problem-based learning methods in the Faculty of Medicine, Arts and Science, and Health Science at McMaster University, Dr. Chari has many useful insights on the intersection between science, education, and humanities. This is Faith, Fact, and the Role of the Layman. What is science as a discipline, and how does science influence society? Science is concerned with the way the world works. It is intertwined with our larger questions surrounding the true nature of reality.
Humanity has always explored the natural world in many different ways. Science has always been around. Mm-hmm. And there is no culture or no group that is devoid of the process by which scientists work.
Fundamentally, science is concerned with the question of how and not about why.
Science is entirely operational. It tries as far as possible to focus on the how question. How do things work? How do phenomena come about? So the why question of why things exist is really not in the realm of science.
Science has influence because historically, people have looked to science for some clarity about why things are the way they are. However, the authority of science does not come in answering the why. Whatever answer scientists give for the questions of why are just as good as the rest of the world. The power of science centers on shining light to questions of how, and the believability of science comes from the process of discovery, the use of superior instruments for searching scientific truth, and the nature of science itself as tentative. Science is all about making guesses, and thus scientific truth is always changing. So, even with questions of how, scientists can never give you a categorical answer.
Every scientist knows in his bones that he could be wrong.
If science doesn't give all the answers, why should we trust science? Well, science does not claim to have all the answers. We cannot satisfy our obsession with certainty through science because it is always subject to change.
You have to trust science because it's self-correcting, because it is tentative, because the scientists themselves will get up and say, I'm wrong.
Science is hyper-aware of its tentative nature, of how it is vulnerable to change. It is a process, and there is always more information to learn and build upon, and that is what science aspires to do.
But the important thing is they're always trying to find more information, to make more certain what they're sure about. And that, in a sense, is what should give the confidence to the public. They're not dogmatic, they're not doctrinaire, and they're not lying through their teeth to tell you something that they themselves don't know for sure.
Where does mistrust in science originate? How do scientists and lay people contribute to mistrust?
Well, human nature wants certainty, right? Because they want assurance that they're on the right track.
But science can rarely give certain answers. A large contributor to developing mistrust in science is therefore a lack of understanding of the nature of science as a process. Real raw data is in a lab notebook, but in order to be understood by the public, it must be filtered and processed innumerable times. In this filtering process, we remove dogmatic assertions, biases, and other human elements until we reach a consensus and information becomes general knowledge.
What students learn and what people learn is what is in a textbook, but the process by which that information has been transferred to a textbook is long and very complicated.
Before we can reach consensus, we are in a period of confusion where there are many opposing viewpoints, and what we know to be true is constantly changing and developing as new discoveries are made. Reaching consensus is thus a long-haul process, and we are often in a state of confusion, a state where scientists themselves are trying to understand the world. Though it can be scary to realize that even the experts do not often have the answers, we must trust that they are always working to seek knowledge for its own sake and try to understand how they are working to find answers to our questions. However, as a layman, witnessing scientific discourse and hearing opposing theories can be confusing and maybe even induce fear, confusion, and mistrust. And there is a role that scientists play in developing this mistrust.
The proper scientist is tentative. And when scientists tend to be dogmatic and they make assertions which other people contradict, it creates a lot of confusion amongst the public. And that's Probably because when they make dogmatic statements, they're really not functioning as proper scientists.
The issue of mistrust in science does not come from the science itself, but from people. Scientists are still people. There is a human element that impedes the objectivity of science.
So you have to really distinguish between the behavior of scientists and science as an entity.
When science fails to recognize the limits of their work, making declarations of certainty or upholding an overly dogmatic or closed-minded viewpoint about their fields, the public naturally can feel weary. Perhaps there are ulterior motives. Perhaps the scientist is arrogant or ignorant of the other side. Science should be objective, without any external impetus or hidden agenda. Mistrust in science thus has some roots in the scientist that does not respect or uphold the objective nature of science.
He said if there is any pronouncement that science ought to make, it is that science should stop making pronouncements.
But when should the layperson be weary of science then? Can we simply trust the word of experts? No. The nature of science makes it such that there can never be just blind faith. Because we do not have the raw, real data from the lab notebook, the layman does have to trust the word of experts that are more knowledgeable than themselves. But that does not mean it is a blind trust or a blind faith. Even when trusting the experts, we must be critical and inquisitive of the process of science. We must be well informed of current scientific practice and inquiry and reconcile this with the judgments of the experts. We must always be willing to listen to differing opinions, gather evidence ourselves, and explore the scientific literature so that we may formulate an informed opinion rather than simply trusting the word of any one scientist or expert. Though it is true that mistrust in science can stem from our lack of understanding about science, it is still up to us to seek knowledge and become informed.
In a free democratic society, a lot of it is our responsibility. So you can inform yourself in many different ways, and we are blessed now. We got everything inside. We have the internet, we have all kinds of stuff. There's no reason why we shouldn't get informed.
What is our role in becoming informed and combating scientific mistrust? With the privilege of internet and our age of information immediacy, each person has a responsibility to seek knowledge themselves, to really try to understand the nature of the scientific process. By doing so, we can engage in informed decision-making that is cognizant of the limits of science and the lack of absolute certainty that it gives. Therefore, the onus is on the individual, but it is also on groups. We have a responsibility to each other to combat mistrust in science, to teach the next generation to seek scientific inquiry and understand the process of science. We can start with children. That is the stage when our innate curiosity is at its peak. We can encourage children to keep the scientists within them alive. Children ask intelligent questions, and on an institutional and societal level, we need to encourage them to continue to pursue these lines of questionings and learn all that they want about the world. We should teach them young about subjects of science. Then we'll be raising adults that grow up to be better scientists, better consumers of information that have trust in and understanding of the scientific process. How do we become more informed of scientific processes and current scientific inquiry? This is not an easy question to answer. However, looking back into history is a good place to start. Reiterating the idea of why science is self-correcting and tentative, we are constantly looking back into history to build on what we know.
Because history is a record of what has happened, where people have gone wrong and people have gone right. If you understand the evolution or the process by which that sort of information is gathered and all that, you'll begin to understand where we've come from.
As each individual person has the responsibility to educate themselves on current scientific inquiry, it is important to parse through the countless resources that is available to us in order to access accurate and reliable information. The Demystifying Medicine YouTube channel is a great resource for scientific information, along with textbooks, journal articles, and a wide variety of sources online. The greatest way to make sure you're keeping up to date is by sparking debate with people around you, by talking and asking questions in class, and by seeking knowledge from those that have more background in the field. It is great to learn about science from one another, but always remember there's nothing wrong with not knowing the right answer all the time. As we ended our interview with Dr. Rangachari, we asked, what advice do you have for students about science?
Never forget that you're making sense of the past with the hope that you are going to change the future. Because we're all going, man. We're all on our way out. The future is you. I can't get too excited about the elderly. I do get excited about the young, because they represent growth and they represent potential and they represent the future. So you guys are in the driver's seat.